Rae Bonney, welcome to Real Insight. This is one of my favourite sort of episodes. I love a good mental health episode, and being the mental health expert and advocate you are, it's a pleasure to have you. I love the frame by which you talk about mental health because you do it with a very particular flavour with around men and boys. And being a man that was once a boy, it's relevant. So tell us a little bit about how you got there and why you were drawn to that specialisation, I think.
That's a really big question, and it's a lifetime of experience. So I wouldn't like to call myself an expert in anything, just a very experienced person who has seen a lot of life. So many people ask me the why question, and I was born in the late 60s, raised primarily in the early 70s, and my vision of life was, growing up in quite a violent household, very disrupted, where it was frightening.
Yeah, right.
And, men were perpetrators of violence in my space. And I was really very fortunate. I did get out of there at a very, very early age. I left home at the age of 15 and was expelled from school at the same time.
There
And
you go.
but had this very burning question about what happened to them to make them like that. And that really coincided with a lot of vision I was seeing about, the Vietnam War was going on, the Westgate Bridge collapse, men being sent to mines, sent to war, this real disposability. And I had uncles as well who were very, very, blue collar, heavy industry, high risk workers who I kind of really admired at the same time, who, again, that question about why are you doing this? And there didn't seem to be much more of a purpose than drinking lots of beer. And so coming away from there and moving out into the world as a young person and finding my way, I was very fortunate to sort of have that burning bright in me to drive me along the pathway that leads me here today.
Which is interesting because that can often go two ways. If you're growing up in an environment that is violent and particularly violence being perpetrated by men.
And that's subjective as well, by the way, because I'm pretty sure that other people living in my situation would not see it like that.
Of course. But the fact that you were then able to lean back into that and be like, no, I want to be part of the solution. Is that something that you credit yourself with, the ability to distinguish what was happening versus you being involved in it? As opposed to like, I'm not a victim of this, I'm separate from this, but I still have a role to play.
I think irrespective of all of that, Myke, I'm a but why person. And that really annoyed people as well. Didn't do me any favors as a young kid.
Yep.
But very, very persistent with the why and extraordinarily curious. And my curiosity for the human condition also has been with me my entire life. So I feel very grateful that that burns bright inside me too. It never gets tiring. It never gets disinteresting. Is that a word? Disinteresting?
Yeah. Well, we just
Never really
kind of
said that before.
It's coined a word now. It's interesting to me because again, like
Not disinteresting.
Not disinteresting at all. But I want to understand where and at what time that you decide, okay, going into psychology or looking after the mental health of other people, like at what point do you make that decision and what do you feel is the motivator for that?
I don't think there is a time when you make a decision. I live with my own mental health challenges and have done as a result of, the buttons that were created inside of me when I was a kid, and very, very aware as I was moving into more of my adult life and forming relationships, especially intimate relationships, that I realized the common denominator of those relationship breakdowns and problems were me, that I was the common denominator. And, full disclosure, coming out of an environment that was really, really disrupted, when I moved into relationships, and back then in the early 80s, there was no help for mental health. I didn't think those words even went together. So in my relationships, I became the violent person. So that's why I really, really advocate, especially around violence against men, in domestic violence because we're not really addressing it in the full form that it is. It's an everybody's issue. It does affect everybody. There are reasons for it that I just don't think we dive deep enough into. Very fortunately, it was that time of my life where I knew that those things were happening and I would not lead the kind of life I wanted to and achieve the things I wanted to if I were to continue being that person. So I was really fortunate that I did stumble across, I should say, a therapist in particular who really, really helped me see what was possible for me.
It's a story that that I resonate with because it's a similar sort of thing. I think in my childhood, I was one of those guys that was raised by men that hadn't dealt with their trauma, just like generational trauma being passed
Where
through.
would they do that?
They wouldn't have. They would have just drank it away. My situation is really grandfather that was in World War II, came back and just drank every day, was violent towards my uncle, and not my mother, but my grandmother. And so that inspired my mum to get out of the house young as well. But then, that trauma lived with my uncle. My uncle, unfortunately, prematurely took his life when he was 40, it's about 20 odd years ago now. And you look around as a youngster growing up, particularly a boy, you're looking for a male role model. And I didn't have a lot. I didn't have a lot of male role models that I could look at and go, oh, that's the guy that I want to be. And now at this point in my life, I start to realize that as a man or as a boy, that's so important, for a guy to have a strong male role model. Yes, you can still be raised by strong, independent women. And yes, they can still put a good amount of adulthood into you. But I think for a boy that doesn't have a strong male role model to model himself on, it becomes a real struggle. Is that something that you recognize within the field that you're in?
Yes, I think, that's also a really, really big space for me around if you get sort of upstream and you look at the why on that and you talk about male role models for boys in particular and for girls. We're looking at a system at the moment that does not support fathers when relationships break down generally. And when I say generally and supporting relationships, that connection through to kids, quite often dads will become either alienated from their children in the worst case, or at the best case, only be seeing them periodically. So I think that we need to make changes to systems before we start focusing on individuals. So when you talk about boys needing a male role model, I think we also need to be looking into what males, especially as boys, can internalize to be their own role models as well.
Yeah.
So I think that bit kind of is missing. We're just looking, we need a father figure, we need good teachers, we need all of those things. But if a boy can't internalize his ability to self-manage, that comes from showing, not telling.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of telling that's going on for boys these days. I had a beautiful example just yesterday with my own son. I've got a son who's 27 and a son who's 16. So two very different generations of raising boys, and they're both beautiful and the best children in the world, of course, because they're mine.
Of course.
And not forgetting my daughter Rose, who's also perfect, and my granddaughter Evelyn, who's even more perfect than that.
There you go.
But Rory said to me a few weeks ago, he said, "Mum, can we book an appointment with the doctor for me?" I said, "Yeah, sure. What's going on?" He said, "Nothing." He said, "I just want to know a little bit about what's going on with me." He's gone from, 5'2" to 6'1" in 5 seconds. And his puberty is the biggest single change any human being ever goes through in their whole life. So that's where he is at the moment. So he wants to know about himself. So we went there yesterday and, we've got an amazing doctor, and Rory spent half an hour with him and just, he took a list in with him. So he was prepared. He knew all the questions he wanted to ask and he came out and he had all the answers to those questions. I didn't need to know what they were because that's not my business. All I need to know is my son is capable of managing self and having a curiosity about how he can drive himself. And I think instead of having this fix-it mentality that we're raising boys and they need to, they should, they have to, we need to be showing them how to do that for themselves.
Yeah.
To a degree.
So can you see where he's picked that up? Like, do you see that as something that you've intentionally instilled in your kids to be able to make those decisions for themselves? Because I know at that age, I wouldn't have had it in my own wit to think that this is what I should be doing to take good care of myself.
Look, they're immersed in it. Our household is me. I'm the matriarch there. There's no one else. I'm the head of the family, and all of my kids have been on my trajectory, my career trajectory, which is my own. It's a very unconventional role that I have in the world. So it's not you won't find that in the careers directory at school. So my kids over here, they listen to everything I'm talking about. So they vicariously pick that up along the way. And I guess, the way we are as a family, we have very strong values and beliefs around self-care, accountability, kindness, gratitude, all of those elements that really go into that recipe of self to emerge really cool cakes.
Yeah. But you say it in such a way that this is common, and I don't think it is. I know, having grown up in an environment where that conversation would have never happened in my house. There would have never been a conversation that is about a value system and about, and this is how we act and why we act this way. And, I think that's probably some of the secret sauce. How do we go about making that something that, to your point, is the fix? So we're bringing that sort of conversation into the home.
Well, there's no fix on that. I mean, you may have missed the bit about my childhood because I didn't have role models around how to raise a family on my own. In particular, I didn't even know my family was going to be coming upon me, but it just happened that way,
Yeah.
Very grateful that they did, but I was very intentional about how I wanted my life to be, that I didn't want to repeat the generational trauma that I'd experienced because from what I understand, what I experienced was a derivative of generational trauma that's gone on for years and years. I copped things like alcoholism. I'm an alcoholic. I can't drink. I'm not allowed to. I'm not allowed to. I'm allowed to. If I did, though, I probably wouldn't be in a very good place.
Yeah.
And I knew that the way that I structured my life and my family had to be deliberate. It had to be intentional, and it had to come from within me. And for me to understand, like Rory's trying to understand how I work, what are my attributes, what are my things. And I'm a curious person, and that's always going to build more curiosity and more stuff. And being unconventional as well has me colour outside of the lines to be instinctive about my parenting. And that's come from a place of humour and childishness and fun and frivolity that also has a very strong foundation of responsibility and accountability.
Yeah. And I think, responsibility and accountability is also another one of those topics. And, everyone that listens to the show knows my mental backstory, but particularly with elements of ADHD, responsibility and accountability can often become perfectionism in my world, where it's like I'm accountable for it, so it has to be perfect, because if it's not perfect, then I'm not perfect. And if I'm not perfect, I'm not safe, is sort of, that approach. And I wonder for boys particularly that are coming through youth at this point in time, and they don't have strong male role models, and we hear about boys, being led by the internet and just, the rhetoric that exists on the internet now that goes unchecked and, is right or wrong. What's the things to look out for young boys that are finding themselves being led by a voice that isn't necessarily a good voice? Is that something that you can observe? Is that something that you need to be aware of in guiding young boys? Or is it sort of you got to let them learn for themselves and correct them on the way? Is there a point of view that you have in that?
Well, it's sort of like, when does that start? Is there a point of time or an age, or should that be an always thing with your children to always be curious?
And I don't have kids, which is the reason why a lot of these questions.
Kind of a bit of a sarcastic response to that question, because we should always be curious about our kids. And many people have watched adolescence, which aired on Netflix this year. And last time I checked, it was the second highest viewed series on Netflix ever. And there was such a big reaction to that rather than a response. So the reaction was, oh my God, our boys, what are we doing wrong? The incels, it was all on the incels. And honestly, if you look at the research on incels, that series was a beautifully shot, well acted, very good series. It was not the truth, like many series. There's elements of things, of course, but the research, if you look at the research, Will Costello, look him up. He's been doing years of research on incels, and I think he would probably feel quite insulted that that was what was depicted as, from his research. But I think also that we're taking this also as lack of accountability. So if this is what's happening to our boys, this is the thing we need to fix. So we need to fix the internet.
Yeah.
No. Fixing the internet is one thing. It's like, AI, oh my God, that's going to ruin
banning machetes.
Well,
whatever
that's right.
Yeah.
So again, if you're deliberate, if you're planning a family, for example, get right upstream and work out how you're going to do it before it happens. If you're in a partnership, agree together how you're going to raise those children. What are the boundaries? What are the rules? What are the values? What are the beliefs that you're going to have before you get there? Don't get there and then just, 10 years down the track go, well, this is all too hard. And I'm by far not a perfect parent, and my kids will probably tell you that. But perfectionism, I'm not seeking that. I'm just seeking a warm, loving household that is safe. And you used the word safe before.
Yeah.
So if you're curious about your children and you have an open, safe dialogue for them that doesn't involve telling them what to do, rather than asking them questions, it's only now that we're putting a spotlight on it that we're starting to see some of the risk factors. We're starting to see the social determinants, the biological determinants that really, really affect boys and men that are different to girls and women. And that's not a sum zero thinking that, if we take away from women and give to men, then that women are going to miss out. It's about everybody. And I think that we have to be looking through a different lens in where we meet boys and men, meet them where they are.
Yeah. I love that because, again, speaking as a boy growing up, I was so lost so often, and you don't know where to go because as a boy, talking to your boy mates about, how bad you feel, it's not something that I was comfortable doing. And I know that there were situations, in families around mine where it was a bit more open talk. You would see that, but it wasn't necessarily the case with me. And so you end up just being isolated because you feel like you're the problem. And the world is consistently reminding you the problem. Like, I think that's the other thing where at the moment, even as an older man now, you feel a bit guilty being a boy. Like, you feel a bit guilty being a man because you've got to somehow settle all of these grievances that have been done by generations before you, whether or not you were one of the guys that were involved or not. And I understand, that we need a world that is more equal, or has opportunities for everyone being equal. But like, you wouldn't have this conversation if it was race-based.
No.
If something happened and someone from a particular race committed a crime, you're not going to go, well, that's all that racist problem.
Oh, I think that does it.
It does. but it's not the way that you would view the problem to fix it. It seems much more comfortable for us to say, well, it's all men's problem. Like, I hear that a lot. I don't hear it's all, Asians' problem or it's all, Indians' problem. I hear it's all men's problem. And it's, if a man commits violence against a woman, it's all men's fault. I'm like, no, it's not. I didn't do anything. And none of the people that I choose to hang out with are those sorts of people. Because if someone was like that in my social group, they'd be removed very quickly because we're not, that way. So I think, what am I getting to with this rant? The importance of trying to position a role model for a young boy that isn't the internet. And they're in a broken home and they don't necessarily have, the support that we're talking about. They don't have a mother like you. What do we do in a situation like that?
Well, there's a lot of things that we can do as a world, as a country, as a community. I'm very fortunate that I not only sit on the board of the Australian Men's Health Forum, I'm the vice president there, but I'm the vice chair of Global Action on Men's Health. So we represent all countries of the world, especially around policy making. And, our research strongly indicates, well, it doesn't even indicate, it is a fact, that men's health policy is pretty non-existent. So if we're not creating policy for men, therefore we're not creating programs for men, we're not creating support pathways for men and boys. So if you have, like you mentioned before about being a boy and not being able to talk to somebody, boys biologically don't have as many words as girls. So that's why a lot of men will typically find themselves unburdening on females because we're just biologically predisposed that way. But there is nowhere else for them to go. So a lot of the work that we're doing is around creating policy, creating strategy that really supports the life cycle of boys to men, that gives you, if you do come from an unfortunate background, then there are pathways that you can step onto that are specifically designed, funded and researched for that cohort. That doesn't exist yet. And I don't want to minimize this at all, but we look at things like the Bondi guy who went on that stabbing spree at Westfield. So there's a man with schizophrenia who's unmedicated in the community. We don't have any men's mental health policy here or in the world. So a mental health policy on that could create some guidelines or some infrastructure around unmedicated people with schizophrenia should not be at large in the community. So that's not a men's problem. That's an illness problem. That in particular is something. And we saw that happen with the guy that drove down the middle of Melbourne and killed all those pedestrians years before that. Same thing. Why didn't we learn from that? Because we pointed the finger at men. That's a man problem. That's what men do. And they don't.
Can I ask a question that uses an old analogy, right? And I remember this as a kid, that the difference between what boys were told versus girls, and, use the example about being out in public, where it's, if you're a girl, you don't walk to your car park at 11 o'clock at night on your own when there's no one else around. That was just the common sense stuff that was told, around groups that I was in as a kid. Boys were still told, don't go out and get in trouble, but you're always a little bit more conscious of the issues that girls can get into because it's a bit harder to defend themselves. Saying something like that now would almost get you frowned upon because it's like, how dare you even insinuate that, a woman needs to be more careful in her movements. It should be fair and it's men's problem. I'm like, okay, we can look at it that way, but we can also go, let's look at the facts. If you do take a little bit more care and act a bit more cautiously, then you will be safer. I don't see that as being a negative thing. Is there something wrong with having different informative conversations to men and women?
Well, I think there's a few things going on there because the question that goes off with me is why aren't boys equally as cared for around be careful? Because the amount of males that die by violence by males is far more.
Great point.
Than the others. So the likelihood of a male walking to his car at 11 o'clock at night and being assaulted is very high and very real. So that's a whole point missed to begin with. The offence that women take about being protected by men, is that where you were sort of getting at?
Yeah, it's like, I personally feel like you can't have those conversations anymore. Like to say to a woman, hey, be extra careful at night walking to your car or get an Uber or something, because then you're looked at, we're just misogynistic. Like it's, you're assuming that men are going to assault women. I'm like, no, I'm just trying to be careful.
Well, I think as we move through evolution, we do change language. I mean, we've got so many more words in the English language than we used to. And we know what all they are at the moment. But I think we change our language on things like that. You're not always going to hit pay dirt every single time. But if you go to the point of view that you're looking out for human beings and you're looking out for people to say, would you like me to walk you to your car? Yes or no? Or hey, I think you look really vulnerable and you probably aren't going to be able to protect yourself if you walk to your car. There's two different things there. So I think one is, women maybe feeling that they want to be more empowered to take care of themselves and feeling quite belittled or feeling, a certain way when
Mhm.
they are minimized. I'm not I don't feel like that myself.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking very hypothetically here. But I think language is important. What's on your face and what's on your tone is really important, how you deliver something.
Mm.
So I think they're the things that we can probably look more than the explicit things around, women don't like having doors open for them anymore.
Yeah.
I love opening doors for anyone. If I'm first,
Yep.
if I'm second, yeah, open the door for me. I'll walk through it. But, I'm a pretty reasonable human being and, sometimes people aren't thinking reasonably either.
Yeah, and it's probably like a really good point, right? If we just stop looking through all of these decisive lenses of, this group, that group, that group, much easier to solve all of our issues. What about for the guys that are getting a bit older, like myself, and, you've got men that are, we talk about the loneliness epidemic at the moment. You've got men that didn't get married, that don't have kids, that are entering, 40s and 50s, social groups are fading, they don't play sport anymore. What sort of things do guys like that need to be aware of, and what avenues are there to sort of re-engage for guys in community?
It is a really big thing. I was listening to an interview with Dr. Zach Seidler this morning, and he's, I can't remember his exact title in Movember, but he's, Zach has been just amazingly progressive in developing really good research and really good literature and just narrative for men and boys, just making sense of things. And when I was listening to him this morning, he mentioned that the loneliness epidemic. I don't like to conflate things that much.
Yeah.
It's not really an epidemic, but it is a key factor in, again, I love evolution. But when we look at how men have evolved and primarily occupying most of our industry, men were pretty much programmed just to go to work.
Yeah.
And protect. Women were our purpose was to reproduce. And that was back then to stay at home and do that. And as we've sort of moved along, men still biologically are predisposed to protect.
Mm.
So they will probably assume these roles where people, they come second to other people. I think the world still narrates that men are disposable because they are still being, you look at blue collar, heavy industry, high risk industries, men are being sent still. And 96% of workplace deaths are still men.
Yeah.
So there's a real issue there. So how are men going to feel about themselves? When do they connect? How do they connect? And I think Australia does mental health and men's health very well compared to the rest of the world.
Okay.
Other countries as well, are following behind. The UK, Ireland do it very well. Canada, America do really good things. However, if we are going to sort of move that dial a little bit on loneliness, we need to have more and more pathways for men to step onto with have permission to actually do this. So if we still have a high expectation of men providing, then we have to create space and safe space and sustainable space for them to step into their own. So, quite often you'll hear of, your typical blue collar man who, starts work at 6, gets home at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Then there's kids to deal with as well. And there's sport to ferry people around, and mums do that heavy lifting as well. Where is the time for a man to connect with a men's table or a men's walk or something like that? Quite often the easiest thing to do is sink a couple of beers.
Yeah.
Because that feels okay. And then that leads to other things.
Yeah. It just gets me through tonight because I'm by myself, and then tomorrow I'm by myself. I have another couple of beers, and
yeah.
that
I'm a
becomes
massive fan of Men's Shed. I'm actually the honorary member of Monash Men's
Oh, really?
Shed. I'm very proud of
Congrats.
that. It's a great
There's one
achievement.
in Eltham near me that I drive past.
Well, there's lots of them. Men's Sheds now occupy 12 countries of the world.
Full on.
So born here in Victoria back in the early 90s. So we've got a lot to be proud of around Men's Sheds. And they are probably one of the greatest, life-saving health promotion charities that, or organisations that I know in the world.
Because it's a bunch of stuff that they're doing there, right? Like guys can get together, fix a lawnmower or, build some shelves or.
But we have yoga, we have mindfulness, we have intellectual sheds where you can go.
Right.
It's not about old guys and tools.
See, but that's the perceived messaging.
Yeah.
Like that's what it looks like from the outside. I think like, how do we make it more hip?
Well, that's what we're doing. That's the work that we're doing in that community, is to bring more education into the sheds. So engaging in, because it's community. Community is a really small space where you can do huge things. So connecting with schools, councils, other groups where, boys can come into the shed safely, observe, and even at our shed learning from some of those amazingly beautiful old school things like carpentry and I can't tell you because I'm not a trades person, but those old skills we're losing them.
Of course.
So it's a real way to keep some of those beautiful artistic things in play as well. So what we learn from our elders is, in Australia we've just been barbaric around it. We house here, one of the world's oldest living cultures, being our Indigenous people. Yeah. We're not even bothering to learn from there. So we really have to get more in tune with creating that culture where we are learning from our elders.
Yeah. And, what community environments like that can do. And again, I use an example. I was always the kid, being ADHD, I was always the kid that could fit in anywhere, but I never really had a group of friends, all right? Because I'm always masking. Like I'm applying a set of personality traits to fit into that group and changing them for that group. And you end up just confused and not really knowing who you are because I'm always serving up a different personality. But when I was 34, it's about 11 years ago now, I started jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, with a group of really good guys. And it was the first time in my life that I had that male community where there's just no bullshit. Everyone's there for you when you need them. I could pick up the phone at any time and say, man, I'm in trouble. I need you to be here. And someone would be there. And I'd never felt that. I'd never understood what that was like. And finally feeling that and having that group of men around me, the way that it shifts just about every aspect of your life, right? Yes, it changes who you are mentally. It makes you feel a bit nicer mentally. But the confidence that it gives you at work, the confidence that it gives you in relationships, the confidence that it builds in just doing the things that you need to do daily, because now I've got men that also believe in me. And for someone that grew up the way I did, that was a massive shift. So yeah, I'm a big advocate of, as men age, don't age out of society. Like get back in and find groups, sporting groups, things like community groups like Men's Shed. Because isolation is a big problem, when you've got nothing but your own head to live in.
And that is great. And I think as we build more and more communities where that address all the aspects of masculinity, because if we look at the traditional form of masculinity, we just go and play sport. Well, that, now we're thankfully moving into a world where we're really embracing diversity, like really embracing diversity that's not just about women, the colour of your skin and what's between your legs. It's really about what goes on in your brain. So I don't think most males fit into the traditional norms. I just don't think they do. You were one of those people, Definitely. So you know what that feels like. So how do we then address, loneliness down the track? Well, sometimes other things have intervened there, like substance or habits that keep men and women isolated. It's a very difficult one to break. You just can't make people go. Yeah. You just can't send them. You need to, you should, you have to. As soon as you start those sentences, you're going down the wrong track. It's about showing people what's possible. Showing them what's available. And if we don't have anything available, and if all we have is men's sheds and, Movember in November, and what else is there that people know about? I know that there are so many grassroots organisations here in Australia that really do great things for men, but they don't get any funding to be able to illuminate themselves so they look and feel accessible to men and boys. So, and that's the work that we do at the Australian Men's Health Forum. We represent the sector and we do raise up these organisations to make them visible for people that really need them.
Do you find you get pushback?
Yes.
You do?
Mm.
Yeah, because I'd be thinking, again, it's funny, even having this conversation, I feel mildly uncomfortable. Like I feel like I should be uncomfortable because how dare I get up here and talk about men, with all the bad things that we've done. So yeah, I just wonder you're trying to push forward and create this space, are there groups that push back on you and sort of go, hang on, no.
Probably more in the early days, probably, sort of 15 years ago, I think there was a lot more pushback and, I've had some experiences that were really quite confronting.
Mm.
However, I think my childhood set me up for that was the worst thing. And so I don't feel uncomfortable at all. I'm not right. As I said, I'm not an expert. All I can go in is the experiences that I have. I'm not a man. But I do see hundreds and hundreds of men and boys in my private practice over the very many years. And so I take their experiences and I use their voices to be able to project. Because I've got a voice. That's what I did get. And I'm not afraid to speak and not afraid to swear.
That's good. Yeah, that helps you connect with the blokes as well, I'm sure.
That's probably my skill is speaking, but also, just this burning desire to stop men killing themselves. That's really the grain of sand that I hold between my thumb and finger is that and everything that leads to that. But, I think this year really was probably one of the most gratifying, and it wasn't about me. I'm going to sound a bit braggy here, but I received an Order of Australia.
Yeah, which I wanted to talk about for sure.
Which really signified that, being recognised at that level for the work that I do was just like, wow, finally, I feel more confident even going and if I didn't feel supremely confident before, I'm even more confident now that I can use that to further project my voice with some kind of legitimacy attached to it that people will accept.
And I think it's so necessary because, again, given the current climate, it's just men whinging. They finally understand what it's been like for us for the past, 150 years and, they just have to learn to go through it. But having a woman out there that's advocating for and making noise for, thanks, on behalf of the guys, thanks, because it doesn't happen very often.
No. And, being able to make sense of it can be pretty confusing. Even for me, sometimes I sit in an echo chamber of my own going, boom, boom, what is this all about? But I think, when you talk about the sort of gender thing, and I think about, women's liberation and the feminist movement, and I'm so bloody grateful for that because I would not be sitting here today if it wasn't for that.
Yeah.
And, very early on, I waded my toenail into the men's rights space and I knew I just didn't want to be there. It felt a lot like very radical feminism for me, just the other end of the scale. So I knew I didn't want to be there, but really helped me understand that men do have rights. Men have always had rights. It's the responsibility that's been taken away from them. That's the challenging thing because women did an amazing job at getting their rights. You go back to the 1800s when, the first wave feminism was about sort of just being able to vote and having a say. And then, in the 60s and Germaine Greer and all those people were really, talking about things like contraception and work and careers and things like that, thank goodness for that because that also got men off the hook of, being, the major carrying the major burden of households.
Yep.
So it worked really well for everybody. But I think what's tipped the scale is that responsibility is being taken away from men, like parenting, because we want men to be good parents. We want them to be great dads. But where's the responsibility in it? Because on the other side, women are still assuming major responsibility for raising kids. And, you just have to turn on your TV during end of school holidays. Oh, mum, what's mum going to put in the lunchbox this week? Or, it's still very geared to women. Even paternity leave, whilst it's coming on stream in most organisations, it's there, but don't really take it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then how does that, sorry, serve men that don't have children.
Yeah,
as
correct.
well.
We don't get it. Yeah. Because in that, I even think along the lines of responsibility, like a guy that doesn't have responsibility starts to become very invaluable within his own dialogue, and that's me. If I'm not, like when I'm at work even, if I almost feel like if things are too autonomous at work, then I've devalued myself because now I've given myself less responsibility. And I think, again, that's one of the anchors where in my life now I know to come back to that. Like I know that I have to just recenter on the things that I'm accountable for, and that's where my value comes from. But for a guy who's had all his responsibilities taken away, and the typical one is the family separation and losing access to children and things, having that much of your responsibility taken away in an instant is basically your whole value, because it's like, well, if I'm not providing, I'm not caring, I'm not instructing, I'm not mentoring, what am I doing? Like, what do I do?
Well, without purpose, there's no responsibility.
Mm.
Without responsibility, there's no purpose, whichever way you look at it. And what picture you just illustrated then is exactly right. So if a man is no longer in the house that he built together, of course, and the children that he bore, but he still has to pay for it all, going to work, where's the purpose in that? Because he's not building anything now. He's actually having things taken away from him. So, if you look at biological purpose, we're here to reproduce. That's what we're here to do.
Yeah.
And the things that you reproduced have been taken away from you. Where does it leave you? That's where we see so much suicide, probably. People assume that male suicide has everything to do with the mental health problems. It's not. It's the trifecta: relationship breakdown, financial distress, followed by custody of kids issues, which ends up in a mental health problem.
Yeah.
It doesn't start there, though. And we've got to get away from it. And I was speaking at the workplace health and safety conference last week with Myke Hagan. You've had Myke on the show.
Yeah, he's a good friend.
Yeah. And I was speaking about this stuff, and a guy came to me the next day and he said, "Oh, really loved you." Because everyone does. No, I'm just joking. I just wanted to put that in there just in case anyone wants to book me as a speaker.
Good.
Anyway, and he said, what really struck me was that bit that you said about male suicide not being a mental health problem. And we started talking about the Selwood brothers and the AFL's reaction, go, oh, let's just do a mental health round. He said, just realised that is just not it.
Tick the box, move on.
That is not it.
Yeah.
Like if it's not a mental health problem, because he said what I saw it as is, the second Selwood brother, he was in a situational crisis. He'd lost his brother. That's a crisis. That's not a mental health problem. We should have been doing something about that. That was just the example. I don't know what the situation is there, but I think we have to be we're definitely looking at suicide so differently.
100%. Because again, from personal example, I had an uncle that took his own life. I was 19. So that left mum without her brother. But then my mum remarried my stepfather when I was 13, 14. And then he took his own life a little over 9 years ago. My uncle's situation was very much mental health, and there was a lot of reasons for that. My stepfather's was a bit of mental health, but it was mainly financial. If you look at what happened after he died, there was a financial mess on the table, right? There was debt upon debt upon debt. And to your point, like he was very traditional. Like he was a very old school, manly man. I'm meant to have built these businesses and set up our future, and like this is my job, as being the provider, and I've messed all that up. Now I'm going to check out. Me and my mum fixed everything. Like within 6 months, everything was gone. Like, she lost the family house and everything, but within 6 months, things are, back on an even keel. And so again, to think if he'd had a support group or a mechanism by which he felt like he could come and just go, hey, I've messed everything up and I need help, maybe he'd still be here.
But maybe he couldn't do that. Maybe that's just not the way he's been
100% he couldn't.
His unconscious mind could not allow him to do that. And maybe really, we talk about help and reaching out for help, but it's actually not there.
No.
People don't want to be burdened with your shit.
Yeah.
They literally don't. That's why we need to have proper services that are meaningful and designed and relevant and relatable, most of all, for men. And the whole kaleidoscope of the male condition, which is insurmountable.
Yeah.
It's not blue singlets, hard hats, and drinking beer. That's not your typical male. Your typical male these days is being grown up. They're very tech savvy. They're very fashion conscious. They're very body conscious. Men with eating disorders, something we don't talk about either, is huge. But you look at any eating disorder support, it's geared towards women. Men can access it, but it's not designed for men in mind.
And so therefore, is it comfortable for men to access? Like, no. Yeah.
No. So people don't even notice. And, disordered eating or eating disorders can come in all different forms. We're not just looking at your, one end of the scale, anorexia and bulimia, to, doing fad diets. It's a lot more than that. It's got to do a lot with control. So, if boys, the boys that I see with anorexia in particular have usually come from those broken homes where they don't have access to their dad and there's no control over their life. So they take control because no one can make them eat. So, but we just go, just eat. Come on, just got to put him on a meal plan. And no, we've got to look at what happened.
You got to deal with the issue, because the not eating is the symptom. It's not the cause of the issue.
It's the controller. It's the thing that probably keeps, ironically, them alive for a period of time. It's like, any form of self-harming, it's something that helps you get through these really tough moments. As if suicide is one thing that can happen, then self-harming is the thing before that happens.
Yeah.
So, if I'm working with somebody, I remember I became a Lifeline counsellor many, many years ago, and my very first call that I took was a girl who was cutting herself. She was cutting the soles of her feet, and you put a bit of a contact caution warning on these.
Yeah, we've got all the stuff.
Oh,
yeah.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I remember sitting with her and just keeping her safe from infection and not cutting too deep, but really sitting in the moment of her pain with her. There was no direction to not do it. It was just how do we keep you safe in this moment? And then more importantly, after the moment has passed, then we had an opportunity to talk about other options once we got her to a place where she'd felt that relief. And I learned a lot from that girl because she told me exactly what it felt like. I don't know about that myself. I've not had that experience, but I do live with bulimia. I do live with alcoholism, and they're both forms of self-harm. So I know what those things feel like.
Yeah. And I've gone through things very similarly, and it's exactly the thing that you said. It's taking back that control, because as my responsibilities start to go away, my value goes away because I'm not responsible for it. So I've got to find something that I've got that control over. And then it's normally something destructive. It's never normally the first thing you go to is something positive.
Well, it depends how you define that, because it can be masked in things like excessive gym going, excessive dieting, hypervigilance on things that can turn into sort of more OCD behaviours that really, really inhibit you from leading a meaningful life.
Yeah.
So, no, it's not, when we talk about healthy behaviours, sometimes those healthy behaviours just mask something more insidious.
Yeah. And the other thing that goes on, I think, too, with young boys these days is, this vision of success. There's this other sort of subculture in the world about, you've got to be wealthy and you've got to be, have a business and you've got to be entrepreneur and you've got to have nice watches and all those sorts of things. There's another aspirational thing that if you're not on the grind and you're not successful, then you're not really, a successful modern man. It's, and again, it's all just these toxic stereotypes that we just let people work out who they are and just be it.
I think we're getting there.
Slowly.
I don't like to be pessimistic about it, in that I think that, I do a lot of work in workplaces, and I think some of our infrastructure around workplace health and safety is really, really proactive. It's becoming very proactive and accessible and relevant. I think things like diversity, equity, and inclusion, that is becoming now something that is really getting to the heart of all kinds of intersections, especially when we're looking at things like people who want to gender transform. Now that it's starting to just see that as daily kind of, yep, this stuff happens. I work in a couple of organisations where people are going through transition, and it's done in just such an amazing way that it's just not a thing. It's just a very normal thing to happen. And again, I don't like to minimise such drastic, life journeys, but, you look to people like Danielle Laidley, who unfortunately went through a very terrible experience. And that was, I don't know how she's still alive, gone through all of that, but she's somebody that is a real role model or an example of how things could have been done so much better and preserved. I mean, the ripple effect of her experience had dire consequences on her family and her children and things like that, which was so avoidable.
Yeah. We're probably heading towards the end, Rae, and so what I want to make sure that I do is just give people the opportunity to reach out to you. So in the easiest ways to get in contact, and we'll have all the links and everything in the commentary.
Yeah, it's just my name. Everything's linked to my name.
I see you've got like a really impressive website where it's just like raebonney.au.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, is this the right? Where's the com or the
That's
whatever?
my email address, ray@raebonney.au, website, raebonney.au, YouTube. All of my shows. I do radio. You can tell, can't you? Because I'm really good at it. No stranger to the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you'll find me everywhere.
Plenty of content out there.
Yep.
Yeah. And then you're appearing semi-regularly at speaking events and those sorts of things, and all of that will be up on websites.
Yeah.
For people that struggle or that are struggling, in your experience, what is the best point to reach out to? Because I know there's things like Lifeline and Beyond Blue and those sorts of services. Is there a go-to that you often advise where you say, look, if you're having a really hard time and you need help now, what's the best thing to reach out to?
Look, I think it's all very subjective. I don't know. I think the lines that you just suggested, there's a starting point, but that can also lead to being very, very disillusioned about help isn't there, depending on who you get. Like I said before, it sounds pretty tough love, but it's got to come from within. So before stuff happens, I encourage people to be really hyper aware of what is in your support network. So where do you go when shit goes down? You get there before it happens. It's like, I never forget when COVID came about and you're hearing about this COVID-19 thing, and nobody got a note in the mail to say, hey, heads up, pandemic's coming, we're going to get locked down, everyone's losing their jobs, we're going to get all these weird vaccinations. Nobody got that note. So if you didn't have a support network in place to help you navigate through that, it was pretty difficult because help wasn't there because everyone's focused on this one thing. So think about, in your support circles, it doesn't have to be people, it can be things. Like, where do you go? Do you dance? Do you read? Do you watch Netflix? Do you do yoga? Whatever it is. And then that support network, like last year, I was overseas visiting my son in London, and it was such a joyous time until, it remained a joyous time because I have a support network, but my house got pretty badly robbed. Like everything, cars, work, everything had gone. And, my daughter rang me, and Rose is amazing in a crisis. So I knew everything was going to be all right. But so I had Rose as my first port of support. I knew I didn't have to come home. I did not have to ruin my time with my son. I knew that I could continue being happy with him because Rose had that. My next level of support was my insurers. I have very good insurance. I keep that up to date. I know it's all there. That's my next level of support. Beyond that, my house got pretty wrecked. I have very good tradesmen as well. I have relationships with my tradesmen. I pay them cash. If the tax man is listening, please just scrap that. And I look after them. I make them tea. I give them mental health support. So they are there straight away. They will prioritize me. Beyond that, to the police, they turned up. They were great. They looked after my son. I got so many levels of support.
That's yeah.
So
never
that's
even thought to break anything down like that. You know, because you're like, oh, I'm on my own and everything's gone wrong. It's actually there's a couple of things.
But you've got to
go.
get it in place. Write it down.
Mm.
And get it there. Show it to your friends. If something happens to me and I can't speak or I'm overwhelmed, this is who you need to call. This is what I need.
Yeah, I love it.
Tell people.
You're amazing. And thank you. Genuinely thank you, like for battling out there for the boys. Because it's sometimes tough to be heard. And it's great to have some female advocacy. So, you know, genuinely on behalf of all the boys and men listening, that's really brilliant work, and thank you.
Well, thank you for making this possible as well, and speaking to people like me to get information out there that genuinely does change people's lives. And podcasts, I think, are amazing in that all of a sudden we don't have to be in university or formal learning environments. We can just be learning from each other. So thank you.
Pleasure. You'll be back because I'll make sure of it. For anyone that needs to follow up and have a look at any of the stuff that Rae's done, it's all going to be in the comments down below. So scroll down and make sure you introduce. Thanks, Rae. We'll speak soon.
Bye.